Hello and welcome. You're watching News Central Television. I am Judith TB. Here are stories making headlines beyond the continent. And we begin the news in Asia, where Syrians are celebrating the end of President Bashar al-Assad's five-decade rule after Islamist-led rebels took control of the capital. Assad fled the country, bringing an end to his brutal regime. The Syrian White Helmets are searching for detainees trapped in Saydnaya prison, notorious for human rights abuses. Syrians are rejoicing, feeling reborn after years of living in fear. The future remains uncertain, with the Islamist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham now in control.
الجامع الأمي هو جامع العريق، جامع بني أمية الكبير بوسط عاصمة دمشق. صرنا نقدر نحكي بحرية، صرنا بطلاقة. إن شاء الله حيكون في محبة بيناتنا إيد بإيد حتى نبني هالبلد يلي كان طاغي كاتب على أفواهنا لمدة 60 عام.
يابا خلال هال 46 سنة اللي شفناها نحن، يعني والله شلون بدي اقول لك، واقع مرير عشناه. واقع مرير مو بس انا، كل جيلي والجيل اللي قبل مني والجيل اللي بعد مني، حتى الختان. يعني موقف اليوم صار معنا نحن، انا وجاي على المحل رجال كبير عمره بالثمانينات، والله عم يأشر كان للتاكسي مثل كأنه ضايع. يعني طالعناه معنا، منين يا عمو؟ قال انا من حمص. قلنا له طيب شو عم تساوي هون؟ قال انا صار لي هلا 11 سنة مسجون، ما بعرف حدا، حتى اسمي انا نسيته، انا رقمي كان 1320.
ونحن كثير مبسوطين بعد ما سقط بشار الاسد، والله لا يرده. يعني انا بحكيها بوشه وبقفاه، الله لا يرده. انه كثير مبسوطين، ونحن هلا عم نشتغل بدون خوف، وعم نشتغل بضمير، وعم نشتغل وعم نبيع الشعب.
Meanwhile, President Bashar al-Assad fled to Russia after Islamist rebels launched a swift offensive that ousted him from power, ending 5 decades of his family's rule and marking a new chapter in Syrian history. The offensive, led by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham coalition, has rapidly captured major cities, including Aleppo, Hama, Dara, and Homs, before seizing Damascus. Assad's downfall follows a 14-year civil war triggered by a brutal crackdown on pro-democracy protests, resulting in over 500,000 deaths and the displacement of millions. Despite relying on support from Russia and Iran, Assad's regime collapsed during the offensive, dismantling decades of Ba'ath Party dominance and ushering in an uncertain future for Syria. Residents in Damascus have been seen cheering in the streets as a rebel faction celebrated Assad's departure, declaring the city of Damascus free.
ما في خوف، يعني ما في خوف من شيء، الحمد لله كل الامور بخير بالبلد. بس هيك ان شاء الله عجله الاقتصاد تمشي ونحن بالف خير ان شاء الله. كنا ما نحسن نحكي انه نحن مضطهدين او نحن ما لنا عايشين بكرامه. كل حدا يسافر لبرا يقول لك في حقوق انسان وفي نحن ما نشوف هذا الشيء بنوم. الحمد لله هلا ان شاء الله يا رب هالبلد.
نظام فاجر، نظام مجرم، هو وابوه، ما شفنا من غير قهر، شفنا من العذاب وقلة المعيشه. ومع دور والدي، انا والدي كان بالجيش، كان يخوفنا انه الاذان الحيطان الاذان احنا صغار. يعني لما يجي يحكي للوالدي مثلا شو صار عندهم، شو عم يساووا بحما، شو عم يساووا بالدنيا، النظام المجرم هذا، نحن نقول وين الاذان بالحيطان؟ لما صغار ما نفهم شيء هذا، لانه كان من والدي وجور اللي يمسكوه اعدام.
حاليا الحمد لله يعني امورنا بخير، انزاح الهم والغم والاكتئاب الموجود بالداخل. يعني داخلنا كان كله مكتئب من العام 1963 لهلا. يعني الاكتئاب الحمد لله انزاح الهم والغم والاكتئاب.
UN Rights Chief Volker Turk says any political transition in Syria must include accountability for those behind crimes committed under Assad's rule. He said this during a press conference in Geneva addressing the crisis in Syria. Turk also called for all parties involved to abide by international humanitarian laws and human rights laws, a move to protect minorities and prevent what he referred to as appraisals. This comes after President Bashar al-Assad fled to Russia after Islamist rebels launched a swift offensive that ousted him from power, ending 5 decades of his family's rule and marking a new chapter in Syria's history.
Any political transition must ensure accountability for perpetrators of serious violations and guarantee that those responsible are held to account. It is imperative that all evidence be collected and preserved meticulously for future use. Reform of the security apparatus will be key. This transition must also ensure that the tragedy of missing people is addressed. Hostilities are reportedly ongoing in some parts of Syria, including in the northeast. It is really imperative, in fact, that all parties abide by their obligations on international humanitarian law and human rights law. All measures must be taken to ensure the protection of all minorities and to avert reprisals and acts of revenge.
In the meantime, China's foreign ministry has called on all relevant parties in Syria to pursue a political resolution following the Islamist-led rebel takeover of Damascus, which ended Bashar al-Assad's decades-long rule. Beijing has deepened its ties with Syria in recent years, with Assad making a rare state visit to China last year, his first outside the Middle East since the civil war began in 2011. Speaking on Monday, a foreign ministry spokeswoman said China is monitoring developments in Syria amid the ongoing political shift.
叙利亚的前途和命运应当由叙利亚人民来决定。我们希望各相关方本着对叙利亚人民长远和根本利益负责的原则，尽快找到恢复稳定秩序的政治解决方案。
So much going on with Syria. Now to discuss this further, we're joined by Laurie Lloyd. She's a world affairs commentator. Laurie, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you for doing this with us. Let's get started. Al-Assad's rule has come to an end after 5 decades. How do you think his departure will change the power dynamics in Syria and at large the Middle East?
And there is the question. It is 24 years of Bashar al-Assad, followed by 53 years for the entire dictatorial family. Of course, Bashar al-Assad was preceded by his father, Hafez al-Assad. Assad the elder was thought to be a dictatorial, someone who had no problem putting down dissent in a violent way. And Bashar al-Assad, the son, who apparently was never meant to be president, his older brother who died in a car crash, was really the heir apparent, but he outdid his father in terms of taking up guns, taking up violence against his own people. 53 years. And in some of the footage that we have seen, we can see the utter joy amongst Syrians about the departure of this family that has not only stifled dissent, but has been kleptocratic, has taken money out of the economy. The younger al-Assads who have gone off over to Moscow are meant to have escaped with billions of dollars, thereby sort of drying up an economy that's really needed help. As for what comes next, and that was a long answer, I think, to get out of telling you that it's really unclear what comes next. And while there is relief about the departure of the al-Assads, there's a lot of worry about the HTS. This is the new faction that has led the military operation that got them to Syria, that completely rolled over the regime military. They are in the process right now of forming a new government, and what we're seeing now looks fairly orderly. The military leader of the HTS is issuing statements through his aides saying that we are talking about finding a new prime minister, forming a government. It's not clear whether this will be the prime minister who is right now still in office. The only resignation we've seen is of the president, but there are many, many fears. The HTS is one of only a number of factions that united simply to topple, united in a very loose way, simply to topple the Assads. They are not ideologically aligned at all. Now, the HTS has said we are promising inclusive government, but a lot of people are nervously waiting to see whether that will be the case. Don't forget, the HTS has its roots in a very extreme form of Islam. They once sympathized with al-Qaeda and with ISIS. The leader of the movement once expressed sympathy with the 9/11 bombers. He has now said that he wants to create inclusion. He has tried to disown those comments, but there is a lot of edginess about what kind of government will be formed. And I think without that inclusion that is being promised at the moment, it's difficult to see stability for Syria because there are so many other factions, some of which are backed by some very powerful countries.
Right. Laurie, I'm glad we're talking about inclusive government in Syria and the hopes for the return of millions of refugees, right? But let's also talk about the UN. It has called for accountability for the crimes committed under Assad's rule. How can Syria balance, holding people accountable with the need to move forward and rebuild the country? And can the Islamist rebel group be able to achieve that?
It's an excellent question. And I think to begin with, we do need to look for whether we see that inclusion that you so rightly mentioned, whether there would be reprisals against people who may be not supportive of this new government. There are certainly many representatives of the al-Assad's Alawite sect. It's an offshoot of the Shia branch of Islam. There are supporters that are still around. Will they be governed by this new government, if this new government can be formed? But this question of accountability, about 100,000 Syrians, perhaps more, were disappeared during the rule of al-Assad. Will they be found? Are they alive? What is the way of recovering them, getting word to their loved ones about their state? And put this against the waning credibility of the International Criminal Court. This may not, the International Criminal Court seems to have lost its way as being an apolitical body to hold dictators and people who misrule their countries to account. We look at the indictments that came down against Israel's leader. France and a number of other countries said, well, we may not observe that. And I'm sure you may be a little too young, but back in 2017, when South Africa refused to arrest the president of Sudan, who was visiting for a summit, who had been indicted by the International Criminal Court, it doesn't feel that this body is doing what it says on the label. And I think that may suggest that any sort of reconciliation may take the model of what happened in South Africa after the end of apartheid with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But I think given the state of the ICC, ideally, this sort of reconciliation would come internally.
Laurie, 2017 was my early 20s. Or sorry, rather, it was my late 20s. So it's my late 20s. I look young, I know. But 2017 was my late 20s, just so you know that I'm not a spring chicken. But let's throw China into this conversation, shall we? They have shown interest in Syria and, they want a political, solution. How do you think China's growing influence in Syria will shape the country's future?
An interesting question. My sense at this moment is this would be one that China will very happily sit out. China is facing quite a severe economic slowdown at home. There's a little unrest, particularly among China's youth, where unemployment is quite high, kind of bubbling up a little bit. Satellite evidence and intelligence from the West seems to indicate that China lost a partially built submarine in a training accident not that long ago. So I think China may be looking at other things. I think, and this has the potential for ongoing mess. I don't think this is one that China will have an interest in. I think where I'm fascinated is what role does America tend to play, if at all? Now, incoming President Donald Trump has said, hey, this is not one for us. However, some of the existing State Department officials in the Biden administration are saying, if we let Syrians fill this for themselves, and if they're not successful, we leave a big vacuum where ISIS can reform. And there are other countries that have a big interest here. Turkey, for example, you mentioned those refugees. Turkey would like to see the return of some of those refugees, although that's a double-edged sword because Turkey gets a whole lot of money from the European Union to keep those refugees, and it gives them leverage over the European Union. But certainly there are interests there. Those interests are not necessarily consistent with America's interests, even though America and Turkey are part of the NATO organization. So the potential for continued strife and mess here is absolutely huge. And it feels difficult to say this when the departure of the Assads really is for ordinary Syrians should be very, very good news.
All right. Well, Laurie, many thanks for doing this with us. We appreciate you for the very insightful perspective and also just giving us more insight on what is to come for Syria in the next couple of days. All eyes now on Asia, on Syria, and also for the people in Syrians. Laurie is a world affairs commentator, just giving us a bit more analysis regarding Syria. Once again, thank you so much. Let's go on a short break. When we return, we'll tell you more. This time we go to South Korea with its political crisis as protesters has escalated on the streets and they're asking for president to face their travel ban. Stay with us. And we leave from beyond the continent all the way now to Asia, where thousands of South Koreans, have taken to the streets of Seoul, demanding President Yoon Suk Yeol's resignation amid escalating political turmoil. Now, the protesters intensified after Yoon narrowly survived an impeachment vote over the weekend. In a related development, South Korea's Justice Ministry has reportedly imposed a travel ban on the president and several of his key allies, including former Defense Minister, and that's Kim Yong-hoon, and ex-Interior Minister Ling Sing-min. Now, Yoon is now under investigation for alleged insurrection following his declaration of martial law last week. Demonstrations have drawn parallels to the mass protests of 2016 and 2017 that led to the impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye. Protesters accuse Yoon of creating a prosecutors' republic by appointing close confidants to critical government roles. The opposition party has vowed to renew its impeachment efforts, keeping the country on edge as the political crisis deepens. And now to China, as China has pledged to resolutely defend its national sovereignty and territorial integrity, reiterating its stance that Taiwan is part of its territory. Now, this follows Taiwan's defense ministry reporting that the presence of Chinese warships and Coast Guard vessels is in its waters. Speculation is mounting about possible Chinese military drills in a response to Taiwanese president, and that's Ling Ching-ting's recent trip to the Pacific, which included stops in Hawaii, Guam. Now, Taiwan considers itself a sovereign state with its own government, military, and currency. However, Beijing maintains that the island is part of its territory and has not ruled out using force to assert control, heightening regional tensions. And let's head now to Europe, where French President Emmanuel Macron is facing mounting pressure to name a new prime minister and form a government that can survive a no-confidence vote. This comes after a historic no-confidence vote last week, which deepened the country's political crisis. Parliamentary Speaker Yael Brain-Pivet has urged Macron's centrist camp to join forces with other parties to form a majority government. Macron has promised to serve out the remainder of his term, despite calls for him to step down and call early elections.
Ça fait 5 jours que je suis au travail depuis justement la censure de ce gouvernement pour préparer cette loi spéciale qui pourrait être présentée dès le prochain Conseil des ministres.
Donc il suffit de le réunir pour qu'elle soit présentée là.
Oui, elle est prête. C'est très important que les Français l'entendent parce que cette loi spéciale, elle permet quoi? Elle permet de prélever l'impôt. Permet d'avoir les recettes pour pouvoir financer derrière les services publics, pour pouvoir signer un décret permettant de reconduire les crédits budgétaires de l'année 2024 en année 2025. Dit autrement, dans des termes simples, éviter le shutdown. Donc nous mettons tout en place pour qu'il puisse y avoir de la continuité dans l'État, prélever l'impôt et financer.
Il faudra attendre un nouveau gouvernement ou pas pour
le
ça?
minimum. Il pourrait être fait par le gouvernement démissionnaire ou par un nouveau gouvernement, ça c'est évidemment le choix. Mais le président de la République a fait l'annonce de la nécessité de cette loi spéciale. Elle est prête et elle peut être présentée en Conseil.
Alors il y a deux sources.
A devastating fire at a fuel depot near Florence, Italy has killed 2 people and left 3 persons missing. 9 others were injured in the blaze, which broke out at the Calanzano plant operated by Italian energy company Eni. The fire was confined to the loading shelter area and did not reach any fuel tanks. Authorities have contained the fire, and experts are now assessing potential pollution. Residents within a 5-kilometer radius have been advised to stay indoors. And that's all on Beyond the Continent. Is back to the continent, Africa, Nigeria, and here at home. But you can watch us anywhere you are. We are News Central live on DSTV channel 422. You can also find us on Star Times channel 274 on Avo TV. And if you are beyond the continent, you can go onto our YouTube page and stream us live. Many thanks for watching. I am Judith Atibi. Bye for now.